Welcome everyone to this evening's symposium called the U.S. National Seed Strategy: First 5 Years and What the Future Holds. I'm hoping that we'll be able to project a screen here in a moment so that you have something fun to look at, but I'm still waiting for someone else to come in. Maggie, are you here? Okay, well, let's move ahead with a sort of an overview
Sorry,
of.
I'm here.
Okay,
I'm
great.
trying to project my screen.
Okay, fantastic. So while that's happening, I will go ahead and provide an overview of our symposium, and then I'll let each of our presenters introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what their portion of the symposium included. So the National Seed Strategy was developed in 2015 by a broad coalition of federal government agencies and cooperators who saw the need to meet the increasing demand to restore native plant communities altered by natural or human-caused events, especially important given the greater frequency and intensity of these wildfires, hurricanes, and floods. So by now, hopefully you've seen all 6 of our presentations, which began with an overview of the National Seed Strategy by focusing on each of the 4 goals. Then we provided a case study to give you an idea of how we see the strategy in action. And then we also have a section on what we're thinking of for the future with the strategy. So without further ado, why don't I go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves. We'll go in order of the presentation. So I think we'll kick it off with Dr. Havens, please.
Hi, thanks, Patricia. My name is Kay Havens. I am the Director of Science and Conservation at the Chicago Botanic Garden. And my talk was entitled Assessing Supply and Demand for Native Seed in the United States. The talk focused on why we need a national seed strategy, some of the challenges associated with sourcing the seed we would like for restoration, what seed is missing from the commercial marketplace, and lastly, how we are accomplishing the first goal of the National Seed Strategy, which is an assessment of the need for native seed in the US and the capacity for that seed supply. The assessment work is currently underway. It's being undertaken by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And both Ed Toth and I are serving on that working group, and Ed's another speaker in this session. Thanks.
Thank you, Kay. Let's move on then to the second goal. And Leslie, if you could start by introducing yourself and then go ahead and tell us about your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, can you all hear me okay? Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Leslie DeFalco. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey, Western Ecological Research Center, and I'm a research plant ecologist there. And I presented on Goal 2, how the National Seed Strategy uses science-based approaches to address the shortage of native seeds that are really important for habitat restoration. And my talk, I address or introduce Goal 2 of the strategy, and I shared how some examples of how our research approach in the Mojave Desert is addressing many of the objectives of the strategy, guiding restoration and providing tools for land managers in the desert Southwest in particular.
Fantastic, thanks. And apologies for the delay. It takes me a minute to unmute again. Thanks so much, Leslie. Okay, let's move on to our next panelist, Vicky Erickson. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you spoke about. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Vicky Erickson. I'm a geneticist with the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service out of the Pacific Northwest region in Oregon and Washington. My presentation focused on goal 3 of the strategy, which involves decision tools for managers, addressing the development of tools to support managers in making decisions for all kinds of decisions throughout the entire restoration process, from seed planning, selection, of production through implementation and monitoring. In my presentation, I focused on a long-standing research manager partnership out of the Northern Great Basin and interior Pacific Northwest that I and a number of people have been involved in over the last 15 or so years. And that work started out by just BLM and Forest Service scientists and managers, along with agriculture research service personnel, NRCS, Forest Service researchers, to discuss the BLM and Forest Service's mutual needs in terms of species priorities and the research that needed to be conducted to help us be more effective in our restoration practices. A lot of my talks spoke about seed zone development, both empirical seed zones for our priority species, as well as provisional seed zones when empirical data is lacking. And finally, at the end, just touched on what development of these seed zones mean in terms of climate change and how that's being addressed going forward. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And now we turn to me. I'm Patricia DeAngelis, a botanist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm chair of the Federal Committee of the Plant Conservation Alliance. I spoke about goal 4, which is our communications goal. And it is the 4th, pillar of the National Seed Strategy intentionally, because communication is so important for making these collaborative efforts work. In my presentation, I talked about the key elements of the goal aimed at internal and external communication, and talked about some of the things that we've done to implement progress under that goal, which began with developing a communications toolkit to help us not only talk about the seed strategy to our partners, but also to help us with our federal inreach, so that we could actually help our agency, our colleagues and our federal agencies understand the importance of the National Seed Strategy. And in my talk, I spoke about what we've done across the federal agencies of the Plant Conservation Alliance, as well as within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to increase our communications, and a little bit about the progress that was shown in our data call for progress report. I think we'll be talking about that a little bit more. So with that, I'll move on to our next panelist, and that is Ed Toth. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what your presentation is about. Thanks.
Yeah, hi, my name is Edward Toth. I am the director in New York City for the New York City Department of Parks of the city's native plant nursery called the Greenbelt Native Plant Center, and also the director of something called the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank. My talk is offered up as a case study in actualizing many of the goals that are found in the National Seed Strategy. I pointed out that the strategy says that if the strategy succeeds, what we should start to see emerging are networks nationwide of really all those participants that are necessary to see that native plant material is making its way to end users: collectors, researchers, farmers, nurseries, seed storage facility, restoration ecologists, etc. So the work of my nursery and the regional seed bank that I run is offered up as as a case study of actualizing some of these goals, I think one of the really significant differences in that are obvious as I listen to all these, number one is that I do not operate a federal facility. I do not provide to the federal governments by and large. I work at the municipal level, and I operate out of a large Eastern New York City, Eastern City, New York City. So I went into some of what the Native Plant Center has done over the 25 years of existence, extensive seed collections, and the creation of the Mid-Atlantic Seed Bank in 2014 to take those collection efforts out into the region. Talked about some of the collections that we've been able to make over that time. Marsby itself, the regional effort, has made over 1,000 collections by itself and with other partners. And then I turned to some of the future goals that I hope are going to start to emerge from Marsby in the coming years that will also further the goals of the seed strategy. And that's about it.
Fantastic, thanks. And before we get to our last panelist, I'll just remind everyone that if you do have a question as you're hearing us present or talk about our presentations, or having seen our presentations, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and we'll definitely get to those as soon as we're done introducing ourselves. And I also want to make sure that everyone is able to see the speakers while we are sharing our screen. In the upper right-hand corner, there should be a view button, which allows you to select the speaker view. Hopefully that is the case, and everyone can see the speakers as well. With that, I would love to turn to our sixth panelist, Peggy Olwell. If you could please introduce yourself and tell us what you are here to talk about. Thanks.
Thanks, Patricia, and all the other panelists. My talk was, I think it was the easiest talk to give, because I was asked to put on the crystal ball and look at seeing and seeding the future, and what this national strategy, how are we going to implement it in the future. And my guiding quote for this was, "This moment of crisis is also a moment of possibility," and that is from the acting director, Shalonda Young, of the Office of Management and Budget under President Biden. And I think what I was trying to do was to talk as if I were queen for the day and what my restoration dream would be. So that's just put it into those terms. And I think President Biden and his Executive Order 14008 have given us this moment of possibilities. So there were several things that I was talking about in terms of developing national policy for the use of native seed. And this is, of course, our focus is in the US. And so all of the emphasis here is on the US, but I'd like to talk a little bit more globally towards the end. I think we need to develop national policy for the use of native seed. I think we need to build up our botanical and ecological expertise in our federal government agencies as well as elsewhere. And then I also think we need to develop a national seed and restoration center with a business plan that serves as the scientific, logistical, and support center for the restoration of public and private lands across the country. And my vision or dream would be that we would have a national interagency seed and restoration center, and the components would support the national plant material or the native plant materials development process. And so my talk went through that wheel or that process where I was discussing how we could expand seeds of success, establish extension experts who know how to clean seed, establish seed preserves, partner with universities and botanical gardens to provide scientific foundation that we need, create scholarships and jobs, create or expand our national seed contracts, establish farmer liaison programs, establish seed testing units to develop protocols, and that would be something, combining or working with universities. Establish additional seed certification units that we could work with state agencies on. Expand seed storage so we can get this material developed and get it properly and environmentally stored. And then establish a cadre of restoration ecologists to develop the science-based restoration that we need. Establish a system of demonstration sites, and then get a better web presence so that we can share all of this information. And I would love to see this happening in the United States and in every country across the globe. And I think together we can share what we're learning here with what other folks are learning in other countries, and start looking at the network across the world. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peggy, and the others for introducing yourselves and being part of this symposium. Before we begin with questions, I'd like to just, now that we've sort of told you about us, I want to tell you about us one more time, and give you a little bit more detail to help ground you in where it is we're coming from. So the National Seed Strategy, as I said, was developed in 2014 and released in 2015. It was written in collaboration with 12 federal agencies in the United States and 340 cooperators, I think it was, non-federal collaborators. And so that was in 2015. We've been working very hard to try to implement the strategy across our agencies and across the United States. And so this past year, we put out a data call to get information on projects that people have done to address the strategy actions. And so I'd like to just quickly show you, Maggie, if you could change the slide to the next slide. I'll just give you an overview. I'm sorry, this is rather small. I don't know if there's a way of making it bigger, but I couldn't figure out how to turn the page the other way. This is our 2-page fact sheet about the progress report, the progress we've been making. And so you can see there that it was, I believe it was 460 projects total, involving 17 federal agencies, 52 states and territories, 20 plus tribal nations. Good grief, I can't even see that number. Too small. A lot of partners in total, and at least $167 million invested. This was from 2015 to 2020. And our fact sheet is available both in our Plant Conservation Alliance booth as well as the Bureau of Land Management's booth. We can certainly come back to this. Yes, and then the second page of our fact sheet, it shows how the actions that were implemented under the strategy had an impact in every state across the United States, as well as Puerto Rico, and I can't remember now if we hit Guam and our other American Samoa. I think we also got a project in. And so I encourage you all to find this fact sheet, but I also wanted to put this up in case any of our speakers would like to refer to it. And now with that, let me quickly check, and certainly if any of the panelists would like to follow up with anything. Currently, I don't see a question in the Q&A. So if I may, I'd like to start with a question to our first panelist, Kay Havens. In your opinion, what are the 2 to 3 most important changes we can make to improve seed sourcing and procurement in the United States?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Patricia. I think there's a number of things we can do. And in my talk, I had a slide that showed, I think, around 15 or 20 actions that I think we should take to improve seed sourcing and seed procurement. But perhaps first and foremost is we should have botanists and plant ecologists with restoration knowledge making seeding decisions. And they should have adequate budgets that allow them to purchase the seed they need. Ecologists recognize that higher upfront costs for well-adapted local seed generally translates to restorations that perform better and are more cost-effective in the long run. So I'd love to see more plant people in agencies and plant people making decisions about restoration. Second, I think it's really important that we improve our capacity for cold storage for seeds. Seeds are a perishable product, and we can improve their shelf life from a few years if they're stored dry and in ambient conditions to decades or centuries if they're cold or frozen. And that really increases our ability to have on hand appropriate locally adapted seed for restoration. And if we have that seed on hand, even if it's not from a ton of species, if it's from some early seral important species, workhorse species, we can get that seed out on the ground right after a disaster because we have it on hand. And then we can do restorations in a more kind of sequential way, working with succession and adding other species along the way. And that gives us a longer planning horizon for producing the seeds we need for that particular site. So those are some of the things I would recommend.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And Leslie, I have a question for you. Having looked at your presentation, and I know your work is focused in the West, so this might catch you off guard, but I certainly welcome, what you might think about this. So I'm struck by the value that you found in the development of these eco-regional projects, including the one you went into in most detail, the Mojave Desert. I don't know if I'm calling it the right thing. I can't remember the formal name of it. Do you think that has been developing this eco-regional project has been the answer for how you've been able to prioritize your research needs and your species, the focal species? I mean, do you think that has given you the organization that you need for that? And do you envision that would be required? That's the best way to do it? Or how might this look in another area, for instance, further east where there certainly isn't as much federal land?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, one of the advantages I think with the Mojave Desert Native Plant Program that is led by Bureau of Land Management, and the eco-regional coordinator for that program is Judy Perkins, who I think is on this virtual talk. But it's been a relatively young program compared to the other eco-regional programs like the Colorado Plateau and the Great Basin. And I think that there was a tremendous amount of history even before the National Seed Strategy that the other programs benefited from that maybe we hadn't in the Mojave Desert, because I think our restoration efforts are more like 20 to 30 years, and I think that there's been a lot more work in the other ecoregions. And so when we came into this this team of understanding the Mojave Desert Native Plant Program and what was needed for seeds, we kind of just thought long and hard about how we might approach it, as opposed to having sort of this history of information that kind of told us, this is what we've always been doing, so this is what we should be doing going forward. And so during that long thinking process, we were able to focus on the Mojave Desert tortoise as a starting place. We didn't have a lot of restoration history. And so because the tortoise is an umbrella species for other species, that is, if you preserve the habitat of the tortoise, then you're really hitting a lot of other species. And then you put on top of that the pollinators that are important for those same diet and cover species, which is what I talked about in my presentation. We're really capturing and focusing a lot of the priorities for restoration that was a much more directed perspective compared to what we could have done, and having just maybe, you know, looking at case studies and trying to get our arms around case studies. So we were pleased with how that started, because it was very much directed and focused on a species that was quite widespread and encompassed others, and whose impacts or whose attention would certainly influence a lot of other species. Now, having said that, that was our starting place. And so it's kind of grown where we added the layer of pollinators to this mix for identifying priority species that also support a lot of our pollinators. So that's sort of the background of how we started. But as far as applying that to another ecoregional effort, perhaps an effort that hasn't quite gotten off the ground. And when I think of the Sonoran Basin and Range, where we've actually created seed transfer zones for that ecoregion, and also talking with, you know, a really important thing is talking to the people on the ground and all the people who do the work in those ecoregions. It really can steer and focus what is important. I think that sometimes it's really difficult, or because these ecoregions across the U.S. are they're so diverse, they have different threats, different ecoregional patterns in rainfall and temperature that are really important to recovering plant communities. It's really hard to take a single method or a single approach and apply it to multiple ecoregions. So I guess I'm talking rather long on this topic, but I guess the short answer is that because these ecoregions are really unique in of themselves, the people that have been working in those regions, the researchers, the scientists, the practitioners, their knowledge base and experience and their recognition of the threats that are going on in that ecoregion is really a tremendous opportunity that should be focused and taken advantage of for designing where you go to develop a native plant program for that ecoregion. And I think maybe that's all I need to say about that. But just to reiterate that, you know, the uniqueness of these different ecoregions can really be brought out in the people that are practicing in those regions, and give the value to what that program can shape up to look like.
Yeah, fantastic point. Thank you. And I had a question. Well, I do have a question in the chat. We've lost one of our panelists who I know is trying to get back in. And so I kind of would like to hold that question for her in the hopes she gets back in. So if you don't mind, Emily, who posted the question, let's give Vicky just a couple minutes to come back into the symposium. And thank you for your question, and we'll get to it in just a moment. Let me turn to Ed, please, and ask you, what do you see as the trends in the Mid-Atlantic region that are contributing to the National Seed Strategy goals?
Well, I think I see trends developing both on the supply and the demand end. One of the things I talked about in my talk was that Marsby was able to conduct a survey of users in the Eastern United States in 2017. It was, we reached out to over 1,000 entities, and we got over 700 replies, all from the Eastern United States, and at least one respondent from every state east of the Mississippi River. Overwhelmingly, more than 70% of those respondents said that they wanted to have ecoregional seed to fuel their work. And of those respondents that acknowledge that, again, over 70% of those were not able to get ecoregional seed. So I think one of the really eye-opening things for me about that, since I've been at this for 25 years, was certainly in New York City, with the existence of our facility, we've been meeting that need for a long time. But the reality is, certainly in the East, that for a long, long time, there are projects being staged at all levels of government and in the private sector that want to use ecoregional seed, and they can't get it. So for 25 years, we've been doing programs and projects and putting non-locally adapted seed out into the landscape. And so just it made me start to think very practically about goals for Marsby into the future, and about how do we build this supply chain, and how do we encourage others to get into growing and supplying. One of the trends is that I've been quite amazed in the last 9 months by the number of inquiries that have come to me unsolicited from various groups in the Mid-Atlantic and in the New England states that want to get into the business of growing seed, ecoregional seed. And I'll just give you 2 examples of that. One is a group of organic farmers in Connecticut who want to think about growing ecoregional seed as maybe not as their full business, but as a value-added crop that is very much in step and with their goals and their values as organic farmers. So I think that's really encouraging. Another example here in New York State is was an outreach I got from someone who works with both with communities that are looking to become energy self-sufficient, and have been working with solar developers, but who wants to see that more ecologically responsible plantings are used in these solar developments, and wants to think about the possibility of using this land under solar farms to grow ecoregional seed to meet needs. So I'm very encouraged that that smaller groups that frankly I think may have business models, at least here in the United States, that are more in tune with the scale of the need and the ability to meet more localized needs. On the demand side of it, there are entirely new demands that are not necessarily directly related to restoring and managing functioning ecosystems. But I already mentioned one of them, which are solar farms, which is a huge industry that is just taking off in leaps and bounds across the United States. The standard for most of these solar farms is that the arrays are only 3 to 4 feet off the ground, which very much limits what can be grown under them. But again, there are, and this is just growing in leaps and bounds, and they're going to, by and large, what they're putting under these solar farms are non-native plants, mostly that have not even any pollinator value. So I'm encouraged, for instance, by this group in New York State that wants to talk about putting these arrays at 6 to 8 feet perhaps, and doing more pollinator-friendly responsible plantings. I've also been talking to someone who is developing a business model to help large businesses with large land holdings to get carbon credits for reforestation of land, and to help them with that reforestation. But so far the way they're looking at it is simply to plant trees. And they're not thinking about, again, pollinator species or herbaceous communities so these are just uses that are going to grow in leaps and bounds that need native plant material, and frankly are going to use whatever they can find if they can't get ecoregional seed.
Definitely. Thank you. Those are really great examples and certainly remind me of things that we should be target audiences that we might want to be speaking to. Now let me ask a question to pose a question to Peggy. I wanted to ask you, how do you think the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's National Native Seed Assessment will be used in the future? And you might want to just also give us a brief overview of what that study is.
You got to unmute, Peggy.
Thanks, guys. That's unusual for me to be muted. Anyhow, I was National Native Seed Assessment was the highest priority for us in the National Seed Strategy when the entire group of people started talking about what we really needed and what should be the thing that we spent the money on before a lot of other things. A national level native seed assessment was what we all voted on as the highest priority. And luckily in 2017, I was able to get some funding from Congress, and we used that to hire the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine to do or conduct a study. And they set up a unbiased board of folks. Two of them are on here, Kay Havens and Ed Toth. They're participants in that. And they are working through, I think Kay talked about it too, because that was part of her talk, was they finished phase 1 and they're now in the process of phase 2. And if I could be queen for the day again, I would hope that when we get the recommendations, and these are recommendations that are made to our agency, to Congress, and probably to other federal agencies, but I guess since we put the money in for it, they'll be definitely coming to us and telling us what they think we need to do. And then they also are telling Congress what they think we as a nation need to do to get the supply chain working correctly for developing the native seed that we need. And I think the timing is almost perfect right now because we've got an administration in place that is saying climate change is important. We need to build resiliency into the communities out there. And therefore, I'm hoping that once the recommendations come out to Congress, that they will be funding us at a higher level than they are right now. And that would be not just BLM, it should be across the board, the 14 federal agencies that have been working together for 20 years on developing this seed strategy, so that we've got that national network of folks that we all know, seed collectors, farmers, growers, researchers, and restoration ecologists. So I'm hoping that they will be giving us the final report, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the fall of 2021, right, Kay and Ed? And that's really that's good timing. So I'm very optimistic about it.
Great, thanks, Peggy. And let me just see if it looks like Vicky still hasn't been able to come back in. So I will go ahead and read Emily's message or question. And Kay has already given some information. I encourage any of the other panelists to do the same. Emily's question was, I'm curious if there is a good source that summarizes the differences in restoration success when seeds are sourced locally compared to more generically. And so Kay has provided several sources, and to be honest, it's a blur which of the presentations actually touched on sources as well, both studies that have occurred, the 20-year study on sagebrush, I think it was. And so those are also sources. I would like to also mention, and certainly encourage any other questions to be shared, that you made a good point, Peggy, that, and Leslie, and actually probably each one of you has mentioned this. The idea behind the national seed strategy wasn't that anything we were wanting to do was new or not necessarily being done. The idea was to coordinate better, to try to help collaborate better by creating this strategy. But for sure, this work has been going on, and one of the things that I get to see because of my role to try to coordinate across agencies across the country is that you can see where I think, Maggie, you need to close your Pulse Secure. You can see where different pockets of the different parts of the country are in different places with this issue. And, you know, some people have been buying local native seed for a long time in the prairie regions, and there's a real market for that. And there's, you know, a real diversity of species available. But it is different in different regions. And I think it's important, as Leslie alluded to, it's not a one size fits all, and it's important not to measure everybody by the same report card, because the priorities and the needs will be different in different regions. And I do see that others, I'm glad the attendees are also able to respond in the chat as well. That's fantastic. We do just have go ahead. Go ahead, Peggy.
One thing I just wanted to add to what you and Leslie were talking about is that I think what folks really need to look at, as well as the people, is the land ownership. So one of the things that's happened in the West is that BLM is the major landowner, or not landowner, but land manager. So I think land ownership is really important, because those are the people that are going to need the seed. And so you want to make sure you're connecting with those folks that have those larger parcels of land or have the need for it.
They're driving the need.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Great. Well, we do just have another minute before we need to wrap up. And I just want to say thank you to each of the panelists, and I'll certainly turn the mic over if any of you feel like you'd like to get a parting comment in there. Anyone? Okay.
No, I just want to thank you for organizing it, Patricia. And I think we just need to move forward. Oh, there's Vicky. She finally got in. She got back.
Hey, Vicky. Let's give her a parting shot.
Yeah, give Vicky the parting shot.
If she can find her unmute button for a moment. Hi, Vicky.
Hi, sorry. These federal computers just suddenly.
That's okay. Yeah, I know sorry. How that is. No problem. One of the things I
have to watch the recording to see what I missed.
What we talked about. Well, there is a question in the Q&A that maybe you can help inform as well. And I don't know if we'll still have access to the Q&A after the session ends. But it was just looking for different sources of information that summarize restoration success with seed, so sourced locally versus non-locally. And I thought of your presentation in particular because you showed the database, and I believe Leslie might have mentioned the database as well, the USDA database that helps you find
the seed zone mapper.
Yeah, so I don't know if in a roundabout way, if that helps address that issue of looking for seed sources that, you know, and restoration success. Is there also published information with that database?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. So the Seed Zone Mapper is a platform where researchers have been posting their empirically based or provisional seed zones as they're developed, and there's the GIS, ArcGIS downloadable shapefiles for those coverages that people can access from that site, as well as PDF of the publication that would accompany it and
Great.
description of data. If that's what you're asking, that's what I would point people to, and I did talk about that in my presentation.
Fantastic. Yes. Okay, well, thank you so much. I am glad that you were able to get back on with us. Thanks again to each of the panelists and to the attendees. We hope you'll visit us at the Plant Conservation Alliance booth, at the BLM booth, leave us messages, ask us more questions, and have a great evening. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Patricia.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
and you can come to the seed
sorry.
green infrastructure session
Yes.
in 15 minutes if you
We'll
want.
see you in the next one. S26,
Yeah, okay.
please join us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Had to put the plug in, guys. That was good, guys.
Thing.